Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Welcome to another video. I've been really looking forward to filming this because we're talking about the PlayStation, the PS1, what it was really like collecting and playing the PS1, the PlayStation, the PSX as it were, back in the mid to late 1990s, what it was like as a gamer and a collector. That's what I like to do with my channel, tell stories of gaming and collecting from someone who was there, and I was very much into the PS1 all through its life. I picked one up after about a year after that first price break. You guys know I like to have a bargain, I like to get a bargain. I also bought it for another important reason. So I wanted a bit of a price break. I waited and I got one after about a year. But guys, there was this particular game or games, this series that I just could not live without. It was so phenomenal. I was so blown away. I'm going to talk about some other PS1 games I played back in the 90s, some of the launch titles and all that stuff. So kick back, relax, and let's check it out. All right, the PlayStation hit the US September 9th, 1995. You may have noticed this is a very US-centric channel because I tell stories and that's the focus of this channel. So just what I lived through and my direct experience. So it's mostly gonna be US-based. And the console sold extremely well. It was a huge hit. Now, it wasn't all perfect. That launch lineup wasn't the strongest in history. There's some forgotten titles there, but it was an amazing console. It was a mind blower. It changed the industry in several ways, and it changed a lot of people, including me, perception of video games. Now, the console was the very first home game system to sell 100 million units. And to this day, PlayStation, the PS1, is the 6th highest selling game console of all time. It even is above the mighty Wii, which came in at number 7. The PS1 sold 102.49 million units. The Wii didn't quite make that, 101.63. PlayStation's biggest competition was the Nintendo 64, which only hit 32.93 million units, and the Sega Saturn, which is way down there at 9.26 million units. Now, the PlayStation beat these systems tremendously in the marketplace. Now, I love all three consoles, but if I had to pick one, it would definitely be the PlayStation. That's the one I've played more over the years. That's the one I've collected more for over the years, and frankly, the one I've enjoyed the most. Now, I'll get to some games that really just absolutely blew me away in the late 90s here in just a second. But I want to talk a little bit first about just the cultural impact of the PlayStation. My point of view and just sort of the industry at large. It was really a game changer, so to speak. Now, it wasn't the first disc-based console, but it really was the first very successful one that used the CD format, the CD-ROM format. The Panasonic 3DO and Philips CDI had predated the PlayStation with disc-based format and with a more like mature looking console, maybe aiming at an older demographic or whatever, or at least a more just broad spectrum of gamers. They tried this a number of ways with the full motion video and the educational games in the case of the CDI or what have you. They really made an attempt to expand the marketplace and to get a broad demographic, but both systems failed. The 3DO was frankly too expensive, and the CDI just kind of sucked overall. Just a lot of bad games that nobody wanted to play. But the PlayStation was a major success for a lot of reasons. One reason being, now, the consoles that came before the PlayStation, like the Genesis, Super Nintendo, NES, TurboGrafx, these systems, while very cool, in some ways, and to a lot of people, seemed kind of childlike and sort of like a toy. Video games, they weren't viewed, I've talked to you guys before like this, when I was in school, like in the 80s, I didn't dare tell friends I read comics. I mean, that was just considered juvenile and brain damaged. Video games were another story. It wasn't really considered that uncool to play video games. It was considered kind of cool. But even so, once you got into your late teens and into your 20s, it was considered kind of okay or kind of normal or whatever, but it wasn't really considered extremely cool like it was with the PlayStation. It certainly wasn't seen as a cool, sophisticated, sort of mature thing to do, like it was with the PS1. The SNES and the Genesis, these sort of seemed like still had one foot in being a toy, even though they had some pretty edgy games, even though Sega's, marketing with to a more mature audience or edgier or whatever. These sort of seemed, cartoonish and like toys. Not so much with the PlayStation. The PlayStation sort of matured the industry. It played CDs. It had a more sophisticated look than previous consoles. It sort of could blend in to your cable box with your VCR, with your hi-fi setup. The PS1 would sort of blend seamlessly right in with these things. And it would be something, if you're in your 20s or 30s or whatever, you bring a date home and you want to play some PlayStation games, didn't seem that childlike or childish. Yes, there was and you're thinking, what are you talking about, childlike? Yes, in the 90s, there was still the perception, and even today, this happens a lot, where video games are considered childish, but it was worse then. Video games are much more accepted mainstream now. But just like the Atari 2600 progressed, the game industry made it more mainstream. The NES did that. The PS1 did that. As a matter of fact, I've had to pick the 3 most important game consoles of all time. I do the Atari 2600, the NES, and the original PlayStation. It broadened the demographic with older gamers with sophisticated titles like Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII, which helped popularize role-playing games and which is still regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time. The PlayStation just seemed like a more mature, more sophisticated, more widely acceptable for an older demographic. It really changed the vibe, the video game scene, having them be more accepted from a non-gaming and from an older audience. It really did. And you may not fully appreciate this unless you lived through it and saw it happen firsthand. It really did change the perception of not only of what video games were, but their potential and what they could be as far as interactive movies. And I'm not talking about the cheesy FMV that predated like with the Sega CD and stuff, although that did make strides. It was just more accepted on a wide, grand scale, and you can see that by the numbers. It broke the 100 million mark, blew away the Super Nintendo, for example. It sold more than twice as many units as the Super Nintendo. All right, guys, I promised I was going to show you some of the games for the PS1 I was playing back in the late 90s, along with the series that made me absolutely have to just rush out and buy a PS1 as soon as I saw these games at Toys R Us. So I'll get to the games I was playing first, including the Raiden Project. This was mind-blowing to play the first couple of Raiden games on my PS1. Very cool little 2-game compilation here, and I love vertical scrollers. And this was just, I grew up playing vertical scrolling shooters, ever since River Raid and Xevious and so many great ones on the Genesis and Super Nintendo and NES. Raiden Project just felt like just an evolution, a great vertical shooter, but with better graphics and sounds. Great stuff. Tempest X3, which is basically Tempest 2000, more or less, from what I recall. You can let me know in the comments the differences or whatever, but I really enjoyed this game. Great evolution over the original Tempest that I absolutely loved in the arcades back in the early 80s, so of course I was going to be all over this one. Now, I'd heard great things about Einhander, sort of a 2.5D side-scrolling shooter. Definitely got its roots in solid, hardcore 2D gaming, but with these amazing visuals, a great soundtrack, and sort of 3D-ish graphics, amazing stuff. Einhander, this is one of those games that just through word of mouth was very highly sought after by hardcore gamers and collectors. I bought a lot of these at Funko Land back in the day. Another one I'd heard great things about was Castlevania Symphony of the Night. People talked up this game as the greatest Castlevania of all time and one of the greatest games of all time for any system, any era. And so I got this one and was not disappointed. Amazing. Typically, I maybe like Castlevania 3 for the NES better than Castlevania 2 because it's more action-packed and linear and easier to figure out where you're supposed to go. But it did not bother me with this game at all. Absolutely loved it, figured it out. To this day, it's one of my favorite soundtracks of any game, and it's probably my second favorite Castlevania after Castlevania 3, but some days it might be my favorite. It's that good, that amazing, as many of you know. Now this was a mind blower. Marvel superheroes. I was a big fan of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2. Before this game came out, I played that in the arcades. I experienced the resurgence of the arcades back in the early 90s. A lot of you guys remember, when the arcades just came back at full force with the release of Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat. Once again, people were flocking to the arcades to play new games. Awesome. And it was mind-blowing that you could play a similar type of game using just Marvel superheroes, just beating the snot out of each other. Love that one. Now, this is an interesting one. Rage Racer. Now, I do like straightforward racers like Ridge Racer and Gran Turismo, but typically when I sit down to play a racer, I want battle, combat of some kind, or like Burnout where you're crashing into other cars, or some of the earlier ones like Spy Hunter, some of those, rock and roll racing or something with a little more exciting. But for some reason, Rage Racer just got its hold on me, and I played this for so many hours I lost track. Now, at one point, I got rid of my copy of Rage Racer, and you can see there's a used price sticker on there, and I bought a used one not that long ago for $5, because for some reason I had sold this a while back, or years ago, and I wanted to re-experience this and still enjoy this to this day. It's just a pure racing experience. The physics are good, and the graphics on this game, I love the graphics to this day. When I'm in Dallas or some other big city and I'm driving through a tunnel, it reminds me of Rage Racer, because the tunnels look so cool in this game, how they're lit on the ceiling or on the side or whatever, and you're driving through these tunnels. It reminds me of driving through the tunnels in Rage Racer. It never fails. Or if I see a scene in a movie, it takes me back to this awesome, pure racer. I love the physics and just the feel of it. It's just a great, just pure racing game. Still enjoy it. Now, I told you guys I was going to tell you about the game series that absolutely just made me have to buy a PlayStation. It may surprise some of you. Some of you, you'll think, oh yeah, well duh, he's a retro gamer. Remember these bad boys. Now I have all the original ones. Or actually, I don't have this original in volume 3. That's the re-release. But the other ones have with the letters on these. I don't know why I don't have an original of this. Collecting days. Anyway, I love these because this was really the first time that you could play the actual arcade game at home. There were similar games, there were great ports before this, but here you were actually playing the actual, the same coding and everything. You were playing these great arcade classics at home, like Miss Pac-Man, like Dig Dug, like Pac-Mania. Pac-Land, not that great. Volume 4 is not one of my favorites. I mean, come on. Assault, Return of Ishtar, Ordon, the Genji and the Heike clan. Galaga, Pole Position, and on and on. Now, not all of these were re-released. 4 and 5, in particular, didn't get re-released because they have a little more obscure games on them, like Baraduke and Pac-Land and Metrocross. So those didn't get re-released, but yes, there were some darn good arcade translations before, but these are just incredible. And yeah, you're playing games like Pac-Man, Galaga, Pole Position. And when these were at Toys R Us, when I first saw these, they were $50 each. Yes, a little pricey, especially in the 90s, but man, they seemed like a bargain at the time. Just perfect versions of these games at home. You're playing the actual arcade version. So freaking cool. Anyway, so I was glad I got my PlayStation for those, and I played so many more over the years. The PS1 enjoyed an 11-year run, and in 2000, Sony released the PS2, but they also released the PS1 that year, the smaller, budget-friendly version of the PlayStation. And actually in that year, in the year 2000, the year the PS2 came out, the PS1, this remodeled PlayStation, actually outsold the PS2. Incredible stuff. Live in your world, play in ours. Remember that motto from Sony? Pretty good little, maybe not quite Sega does what Nintendo don't, but it was a good marketing campaign. And there were so many great PS1 games over the year. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Wipeout. I could go on and on. There's an incredible version of Doom. But I want to hear from you guys. I want you guys to let me know, did you grow up playing the PlayStation? Did you get one in 95, the year it came out? Were you playing during the 1990s? What were some of your favorite early games for the console? And what was your impression? Do you consider this the first mature video game console? Do you consider this the first console that sort of truly broke into the mainstream beyond the NES, beyond the Atari 2600, to a more adult demographic? It sure seemed like it at the time, living through it. It sure gave me that impression. All right, guys, thank you so much for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. You guys rock. Let me know your PlayStation memories, and we'll talk to you in another video.
It's me, Mario!